Over the last 2 decades, two things have risen dramatically. Number one, erectile dysfunction in younger men. Number two, the use and consumption of online pornography. These two trends are undeniably rising at the same time. So, the question that many people are starting to ask is actually very simple. Can porn actually cause erectile dysfunction? Well, PIED, porn induced erectile dysfunction, describes a situation where the brain becomes conditioned to respond more strongly to artificial sexual stimulation. Many times it's from the screen, more so than real world intimacy. Well, I'm Dr. Trish Leigh, cognitive neuroscientist, and today not only am I going to tell you what's happening in your brain and your life, I'm going to show you what neuroscience is beginning to reveal about this very question. So let's dive in. This video is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. If you're ready to quit porn and reclaim your life mentally and physically, go over to drtrishleigh.com/book. Can porn use cause ED? We know that over the last decades, not only has porn use that you will see in the bottom graph here, the bottom of the visual, not only has porn use increased from 1 to 2 billion in consumption to 40 plus billion in today's day and age. We know since the dawn of the internet, porn use is continuing to climb. COVID made a dramatic increase, and you won't be surprised to know that increase never came down. Now, along with it is the graph at the top. In the early 2000s, we saw 2 to 5% of erectile dysfunction in men under 40. It is climbing to 10 to 20%, and we know from a wealth of research, it too is on the rise. So, what might be happening for these men who are struggling with erectile dysfunction because of porn? That leads us to the hijack. Let us start here. So, there is a very unique pattern that scientists have been noticing. It's a pattern that I've studied myself. Men reporting erectile dysfunction with their partners. So, this is men who struggle with sexual arousal dysfunction when they're trying to be with their honey. So, this raises an important question researchers began asking. Why can some men get aroused alone, but not with a partner? At first, that seems very confusing. But if it was an issue with the body, it wouldn't work in either situation, right? But it does, which tells us something critical. The physical system is, in fact, capable of responding. So the problem isn't in the body. It's actually a signal activating issue in the system. So what researchers started to ask is, perhaps something in the environment is teaching the brain what to respond to. And that raises a much bigger question. What signal in this signal activating system issue has the brain been learning? Einstein characterized the brain as the most complex thing in the universe, which means it's very good at learning patterns. And in the modern world, one signal has become far more powerful than anything the brain was evolved to handle. We see it here in this graph. This is the hijack. It's called a supernormal stimulus. Pornography proper is at the top of supernormal stimuli. Sexualized social media is just under. So what we see on this graph is that a natural stimulus would raise to this baseline level, this dashed line on this graph. If you were stimulated from something in the natural world, you would reach this level 10 stimulation. So level 10 would be an amazing sexual experience with your honey. But now, enter pornography into the picture. It's a supernormal stimulus. Look how it climbs, this red line in arousal response. Now, not only does it not go up in this arc, it goes up on a very fast and high trajectory, supernormal. And then in the system, sensitivity drops. We're going to talk about this more in just a minute. But what we know from the science is that the hijack that many men are experiencing in the modern world is the hijack of the supernormal stimulus of pornography. So when it comes to arousal function, for most men, the changes don't appear all at once. This is the frustrating part. They happen gradually. So arousal will still work on and off, or perhaps with the stimulation that it's used to. Perhaps it's consistency, frequency, perhaps it's genres or individualized sexual avatars, perhaps it's scenes or scenarios. Most men rely on this visual and auditory stimulation as part of that supernormal stimulus. Others describe the attraction to a partner slowly feeling muted, or that their activation has become slower. For many men, the changes in arousal function don't appear all at once, which can be very frustrating. They happen very gradually. So perhaps it's that sexual arousal function works on and off. Perhaps especially when the brain is getting the stimulation that it's used to, like novelty from the screen, intensity from pornography proper, then you can become aroused. Or you might notice that when you're trying to be with your honey, you can't get aroused, or it's on and off. Maybe it takes more time. Maybe it takes more stimulation on your part, self-stimulation. But this is how this desensitization in the brain starts to show up. When this happens, most men start looking for solutions, more supplements, performance enhancers, even prescription medication at younger and younger ages. Men start looking for a way to try to restore something that used to happen naturally. But those solutions often just treat the symptom, if that. But they never get to the underlying cause. And the reason being is that the body is actually still working. So if the body is still working, it's the signal activating system that isn't. So researchers, and maybe even you, are beginning to ask a bigger question. What is that signal activating system that we're talking about? And what changed in the environment? One possibility researchers began examining was the rapid rise of high-speed internet pornography. For many men, the experience of sexual arousal function or lack thereof doesn't show up all at one time. Instead, it might disappear and reappear depending upon the conditions, or depending upon the day or the time, or who knows. And in this case, many men start looking for solutions. They start looking for performance enhancers, and even for prescription medication at younger and younger ages. But here's the thing, is that all of those modalities, they address the symptoms, not the underlying cause. So researchers started to ask a very important question, and this is a question that I challenge you to think about too. Has something in the environment, your environment, changed? Has something in the environment changed? Well, something has. Since the early 2000s, the rise of the use of high-speed internet pornography. In today's day and age, men and women alike have porn in their pockets. Now, here's the thing. Your brain evolved in an adaptive sense to respond to real-world cues, like connection with the people that are important to you, like novelty in the real world, a new restaurant, a new activity like go-karting. Seamus went go-karting last week. Your brain is supposed to get the activation from real world stimuli, social interactions that involve sitting next to or across from another person that you're interested in learning about. These signals are what activate the brain's reward system and help guide attraction and motivation. The key parts of the reward system include the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area, and the prefrontal cortex, which help regulate motivation and learning. But modern digital stimulation delivers something far more powerful. Endless novelty and constant escalation of the content, instant gratification and reward. In neuroscience, this is called supernormal stimuli, a stimulus that activates the brain reward system more intensely than the natural signals that the brain evolved in a healthy way to process. And when the brain encounters supernormal stimuli repeatedly, you know what happens to the dopamine system? It begins to maladapt, adapt in the wrong direction, because dopamine isn't just about pleasure. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation and motivation. It teaches the brain what to seek and what to repeat over and over. The reward circuit that I just told you about is where dopamine activation takes place. This is where we see it light up even more when there's intense artificial novelty, when there's escalation of the behavior, of the genre, of the avatar, of the engagement in parasocial relationships like in OnlyFans. That's where the reward system gets hijacked, and it leads to a very powerful maladaptation that is the miswire. When extremely intense stimulation triggers large dopamine spikes repeatedly, the brain protects itself. It does this by lowering sensitivity, like we saw on that second slide. This process is called dopamine downregulation. The reward system essentially turns the volume down. And when sensitivity drops, something important happens to arousal. The signals that once activated attraction easily, like eye contact, touch, connection, real interaction, they may no longer be enough to trigger the same response. This is because the brain has learned to respond to something stronger. Like we talked about it before, it's the arousal template that you keep going back to. Now, think about it logically. If you're married or if you're in a committed relationship and you have your partner who is the same, right? Not that novel. And instead, you're going back to pornography and you're clicking on different avatars, different people. You're clicking on that next tab to get something new. You're involved in different genres and scenarios. This is the novelty that we're talking about. So many people have asked, all right, high-speed internet pornography, how is that different from anything else? Or how is it different from the Playboy magazines of the past? It's different because of the endless variety, because of the sheer intensity and the dopamine that is produced in your brain. Now we see it here, the arousal response. When it comes to pornography, that red line goes up and it is very high, super normal stimulus. Then human connection pales in comparison. If it would be up here because it would be novel, right? If you're working at your desk and you're an accountant, you're working with your numbers all day long, then you go meet your honey for dinner and you get a new balsamic goat cheese fig pizza and it's delicious and you laugh and she tells you a new joke you've never heard. Healthy novelty. But now that novelty can't compare. That sensitivity lowers, and the gap between pornography and real life sexual stimulation, intimacy, and just pleasure, even from your work, your hobbies, and your honey, the gap is far too big to compete in today's day and age. That's the miswire that we're talking about. This is what makes your brain continually want to go back to pornography. This is why you have urges for the dopamine dependency of that high-level supernormal stimulus, and your real life can no longer compare. So over time, the arousal system becomes conditioned to expect this high-level intensity stimulation pattern that it experiences over time, which means that the brain can begin activating arousal much more easily to pornography rather than to real people. Now, this is not because there's a problem with the body, but it's because the reward system has learned the wrong signal. The brain didn't fail, it actually maladapted. So, in simple terms, repeated high novelty stimulation can train the brain's reward system to expect that high intensity stimulation pattern, and it lacks when it doesn't get it. Okay, so what does the research fundamentally say about pornography and erectile dysfunction? A 2021 international study of more than 3,000 men, that's a large study, found that over 21% of these men reported erectile dysfunction, and higher levels of problematic pornography consumption or use were associated with higher probability of ED. So hear me on this. Problematic porn use is highly associated with erectile dysfunction in many men, which leads to brain mapping. Brain imaging studies help researchers understand how the reward system responds to different stimuli. In people experiencing PIED, this system may show stronger activation to pornography cues and weaker activation to real-world sexual stimuli. So over time, repeated high-intensity stimulation can lead to dopamine system maladaptation. Sometimes this is described as dopamine downregulation, where the brain reduces sensitivity to protect itself from constant high-level stimulation. We can see that on the brain map that you see on this slide. We are looking at two different bandwidths in alpha. In this case, the person has much higher levels of low alpha and much lower levels of high alpha. As we've talked about before, this discrepancy in the alphas is what leads to that desensitization. The red in this brain map is the brain's need for high levels of dopamine. The blue in this brain map is the brain's lowered ability to get to that common stimulated state by itself. So we know that this has been verified in a very large study of brain maps of people with PIED. What we're seeing is reduced alpha in one bandwidth because the brain needs high levels of dopamine, and inflated levels of alpha in the other bandwidth, showing that it more strongly responds to high novelty digital stimuli than to slower real-world intimacy signals. Think of it this way: fast dopamine from the screen, not slow dopamine from your bedroom. This is why my son Declan and I are championing our nonprofit, which we've renamed the Supernormal Project. We have a new slogan, and it's called Earn the Dopamine. In this brain map, this is a brain that's not earning the dopamine. It is experiencing the dopamine flood from pornography, so it can't get there itself. So in an easy to understand way, the brain has adapted to the strongest signal that it repeatedly experiences. Think of it this way, and I've talked about this a lot before. It's like standing at the precipice of two trails in a wooded forest environment. One trail you've been taking for a very long time. It's trampled down, it's wider, it's much easier to traverse. That other pathway, now it's not quite as trampled. It has more brush hanging over it, right? So this is what's happening in the brain. When it continues to take that pathway of high intensity stimulation, the pathway of slower, quieter, less novel real world intimacy is much more difficult to be able to go down that pathway. So, if you keep going back to pornography proper and sexualized social media, you keep taking this path on the left and it keeps getting trampled. It will be much easier for your brain to go down it. There's actually also a type of concrete in the brain. It's a transcription factor called delta phos-B, which is also helping to trample this pathway so that it may never grow over if you don't stop taking it as soon as possible. This other path is the path that leads to healthy intimacy, excitement, pleasure, joy, and connection with your honey in your bedroom. If you don't start taking this path as the primary path that you take when you get into that forest of sexuality, it will be more difficult for you to traverse, which means you will experience sexual arousal dysfunction, SAD, and you may experience full-blown ED, depending upon how trampled the other path is. And you won't be able to experience that level of pleasure and joy in your real world sexual relationship. So when you stand every single time at the precipice of taking these two paths, I want you to remember the path you keep taking is the one that will be easiest for your brain and for you to take. Every single time that you stand between these two paths, visualize them in your mind, you are making the choice to have healthy real-world intimacy with strong sexual arousal function or not. But of course, there's good news, my friend. We know that through the wonders of neuroplasticity, that the brain has the power to heal itself if you put it in the right environment. Like this environment. This was Friday night. This week has been a tiring, very busy, hectic one. So we get the text from the besties, my besties on Friday night saying, we're all going to hang out at this place. What time's everybody showing up? And you know I wanted to text, I can't come. I'm too tired. I'm hanging out on the couch. But I know that real world connection with my people is one of the most important things for my brain health. So I texted, the Lees will be there at 5:30 p.m. Actually, we're the first ones there. So the Lees will be there. And so we roll on over and look in this awesome picture. Everybody's kind of, blinded out because of the twinkly lights. It was the most gorgeous night. It was warm, the twinkly lights. We just got pizzas from this place right in this area. And we just hung out and laughed and told stories and did weird things. And it was really, really fun. Real world connection, healthy levels of dopamine, novelty in that new balsamic pizza that was divine, fun conversations of what's going on in my people's lives. And my point for you is you don't need a million people. You just need a couple people and a couple activities that light you up each week. Remember that. So many people say to me, Dr. Trish, you're lucky to have the 8 besties that you hang out with all the time. Well, if you don't have besties, get into the world and find some. If you think that's too difficult right now, there's always animals and creatures. Like this picture of me and Chewie. Look at this man, Chewbacca. He never will look at the camera if you're trying to get a selfie, which is why I took the photo of him by himself. He is 78 years old by human standards these days. So many of the clients I've worked with, I've said to them, get a dog, get a cat, get a fish. You can create connection in creative ways if you set the intention. So let's get to the rewire. All right, so how can you possibly use neuroplasticity to rewire your brain? It's fairly simple. Easy, maybe not, but fairly simple. But first, let's ask the question that researchers are asking, and maybe that you're wondering. Can the brain recover from porn-induced erectile dysfunction? If the brain learns one signal, guess what? It can learn another. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to remove the supernormal stimulus of pornography consumption. We're going to restore dopamine sensitivity and rewire arousal with real connection. And in that way, the brain can begin to strengthen those natural, healthy pathways again. So here's what we're going to do. Number 1, remove the supernormal stimulus. What does that involve? Reduce exposure to high-intensity stimulation so the brain stops receiving these constant dopamine spikes. No porn proper. I know what you're thinking. Yes, no porn proper. No sexualized social media. Reduction in seeking and scrolling reels, short-form video, and balancing your screen time, mostly consuming videos that are fun, motivational, and have story structure. In that way, you are going to do number 2, restore dopamine sensitivity. So as that stimulation decreases, your reward system will recalibrate and your dopamine receptors will begin to regain sensitivity again. Then you can do number 3, retrain the arousal pathways back into your real life. Gradually pair arousal with real-world connection, presence, and intimacy, so your brain can strengthen those natural pathways again. And because of neuroplasticity, the brain can learn those new arousal pathways when the stimulation pattern changes. Then, of course, there's number 4, regulation. Progress is not perfection. It very rarely happens with perfect linearity. There usually will be dips, but over time the system stabilizes. Porn loses its pull on you. Your erections begin to naturally show up again. Your brain and your mind feel calmer, steadier, more regulated. So this will happen when the reward system regains sensitivity and begins again to respond to healthy, natural human connection, not that high-intensity artificial stimulation from the screen. So what does real-world healthy arousal look like? It looks like 2 nervous systems actually interacting, eye contact, emotional and neurological attunement to each other. The signals in your brain, they've evolved to respond to that. That's when ED becomes reversible. That's when those progress dips will level off. That's when your arousal can come back and be connected to that partner or honey in your real life. And this leads to the real question that most people should be asking. The question isn't, what's wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? The question is, what signals has my brain been trained to respond to? That's where brain mapping with me can come into play. Brain mapping, often called QEEG, measures electrical activity across the brain to identify patterns of dysregulation. The brain map gives a very clear picture of how the brain is functioning. In my practice, we use very targeted neurofeedback training in my Regulate First program to help guide the brain out of the pattern that it's stuck in into healthier arousal patterns. During neurofeedback, the brain receives real-time feedback about its own activity, and over time, it begins strengthening the more regulated pathways, kind of like bicep curls for the brain. What we're really doing is helping the brain use neuroplasticity very intentionally, unlocking that neurorigid pattern and getting the brain moving in the healthier direction. And when we change the signals and we train the system in the right direction, those new neural pathways, they begin to form and they lead you to the pleasure pathway reset in your life. When we look at progress visualization over time, we often see the reward system regaining its own sensitivity. We see those regulatory networks strengthening again and the brain beginning to respond to natural connection in the real world. In this way, arousal is not a body or a performance problem. It's a brain regulation signal issue. And when regulation improves, natural arousal pathways often return by themselves. So let's look at this graph. On this graph, you can see that there's very high levels of the red line, high beta, stress activation. This often accompanies the very high levels of that slow alpha that I showed you earlier. That's what these blue dots are. So the stress activation is a compensatory strategy, and you often experience it as performance anxiety. Many of the clients that I work with, they are told your body is fine, your testosterone levels are fine. This is in your head. And you know what? Your provider is right to a certain extent, because those psychological issues are neurological issues also. They have the neurological components that make them so for you. They're called high beta. So here we see the compensatory strategy of high beta and the need for high arousal in the inflated slow alpha. What we also can see on this progress visualization graph is both of them reducing and stabilizing over time. And when I say over time, it's over a few months, not over a lifetime. We can see here, this graph starts June 21st of 2025. It ends November 20th. This is over a few months. Down, down, down comes the need for dopamine, comes the stress activation. And here towards the end, you can see there's healthier arousal and a lot less stress surrounding the issue. That is what brain regulation can do for the cause if you're experiencing erectile dysfunction or sexual arousal dysfunction of all kinds on the continuum, what I call SAD. I've developed protocols based on my findings in the research that goes along with PIED. I call it LAF, the Leigh Arousal Function Protocols, and you are looking at it on this graph. So let's go to your brain hack strategy of the day. Many people ask, how do I fix porn-induced erectile dysfunction? Well, it starts by changing the signals that your brain experiences. So we're going to talk about the 4 R's to rewire erectile dysfunction to erectile function. Number 1, reduce artificial stimulation. Limit, I would say adios, porn, endless scrolling, and high-novelty digital content before bed especially. Reintroduce, that's the second one, real connection. Spend time with your partner. Make eye contact. Touch, talk, and be physically present. Make it an embodied activity. Then reset the reward system. Create reward balance. Get outside. Exercise. Like me, this is me running to that destination, right? I run a 2-mile loop in my neighborhood, not because I love running, because I want to keep my reward system balanced. Make sure you get sleep well. I follow my sleep clock like my life depends on it, because it does. When you do this, your reward system will balance out and you will begin to feel more stable and you won't need constant stimulation. And then lastly, repeat the signals that you want your brain to learn. For example, choose real-world novelty, social interactions, hobbies, movement, and meaningful goals. Let those fun, novel, new experiences show up in your real life. Plan them intentionally. Okay, so let's go back to the original question. Can porn cause erectile dysfunction? What we now understand from neuroscience is this. The brain adapts to the signals it experiences most. If the brain is repeatedly exposed to high-intensity artificial stimulation, it can begin responding more strongly to those very signals from the screen most times, instead of to real life connection. It no longer compares. But that does not mean that anything in the system is broken. It means the brain did exactly what it is designed to do. It adapted, but in this case, it maladapted. And that same neuroplasticity that allowed the brain to learn that pattern in the first place is exactly what it allows it to rewire that miswire and be able to restore natural arousal again. When the signal changes, the brain changes. And that brings us to the most important takeaway. You know what I'm going to say, right? You can either control your brain, or in fact, your brain will control you. Remember that pathway? The choice is yours. Let's go. If you're looking for more help on the journey, please go over to drtrishleigh.com and schedule an appointment to get our help. I want you to remember that if you're struggling with ED or SAD, you don't have to struggle alone. Not only can we provide the support, we can provide the tools and the top tier technology to help you reset those pleasure pathways in your brain. Go over to drtrishleigh.com and check it out.